See, this is, you know, we talk about recruiting, you got to get out and talk to people. See, this is just like church on Sunday, you know, you tell people to get up and shake hands and everybody keeps going. All right, we'll get started. I'll promise you we won't be standing up here. I know the camera person is probably going to get mad at us, but, you know, we're not going to stand up here all day and talk. So welcome to our recruiting, selecting, and retaining the 21st century workforce. Hopefully today you'll get something out of what we're talking about. And we got a great presentation for you today. We'll go for about 60 minutes, and then we'll take some questions because we're pretty sure there'll be a lot of questions. But first, I want to introduce my panel. We'll start with Dr. Matt Bostrom here. He's the former Ramsey County Sheriff, over 30 years law enforcement experience. He was a St. Paul police officer for a long time and an assistant police chief before he became the sheriff of Ramsey County. Good person. And Dr. Bostrom is currently studying at Oxford University now, getting another doctorate. You know, some people like punishment once, some people like it twice, so I guess he'll be all right. Then we got Chief William Blair Anderson, who was a Dakota County deputy for a while, Carver County chief deputy, and he's a police chief in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Blair's been one of my mentors for a long time, and he and I worked together for a while. And then we got the Ramsey County Sheriff, Jack Sarir, who is also a doctor, and these guys just like gluttony for punishment up here, but Sheriff Sarir has been a police officer for a long time, St. Paul police officer before he became a sheriff of Ramsey County also. And I am Booker Hodges. I also have a doctorate, so we all like gluttonies for punishment. And I'm the Undersheriff for the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office. So with that, where are we at in this country right now in terms of demographics? We'll watch this brief video. I'm not trying to sell anybody's book, but the video does a very good job of describing where we're at demographically in this country. You got the volume back there? Oh. Sorry, we'll have to have them turn it up back there. I can't do sign language. You got one guy running 2 stations. Sorry, I got a wireless speaker if that'll work. Or is it down here? Yeah, we got a couple videos, so we're gonna need the sound for people today. Okay.
Coming out of there. Yeah, it's coming out of there. Yeah, it's coming out of the projector instead of the system. Is you plugged into the here. Sorry.
Sorry.
Plug in?
Yeah, it's plugged in.
Okay, tell you what, let me grab that wireless mic, I'll stand over it.
Oh, Jack, I got this.
Sure, yeah.
Always complicated. So we're gonna go old school here with our little wireless speaker. We'll be all right.
Comparable to when the baby boom transformed our country in the late 20th century. In my book, Diversity Explosion, I write about how this time the demographic force is the growth of new minorities, especially Hispanics, Asians, and multiracial Americans. They will make a similar impact on the U.S., its society, economy, and politics. This minority growth is occurring just in time to counter the slow growth and aging of the nation's white population. Most of this increase isn't happening because of immigration. It's happening from the bottom up due to growth of U.S.-born minorities. This growth will revitalize our nation's youth and labor force and spread the melting pot to new parts of the country, facilitating minority assimilation at a time when the economy is increasingly globalized. Minorities, particularly Hispanics and Asians, are dispersing throughout the country. Minority populations aren't just growing from within, they're blending. Multiracial marriages in the middle of the last century were less than 1% of the population. Today, they comprise nearly 10% of all marriages, and more than 15% of all new marriages are multiracial. These shifts have not only cultural implications, but political ones. One particularly salient example is that minorities overwhelmingly vote Democratic. This trend appears only to be increasing and will undoubtedly reshape politics in America.
All right, so as you can see in this country right now, currently, how our demographics are shifting and why they're shifting. And if you look here, if you can see this graph in terms of where we're at in law enforcement with officers of color versus the population. So in 1990, 24% of our population were people of color, 17% of our police officers were officers of color. If you move to the last study that was done in 2003, 37% of our country is people of color, and approximately 27% of our officers are people of color. If you go over time, you can see that the gap is widening between what the population is in terms of people of color and law enforcement officers in this country. Even though we have 27% officers of color in this country, currently right now, some of these numbers can be a little bit misleading. And the reason for that is if you look, the vast majority of officers of color in this country work in police departments that serve populations over 1 million people. So if you look at the top, where you have 1 million population, over 1 million people, those departments are made up of 53% approximately of white officers and approximately 47% of officers of color. We'll talk about later, but the vast majority of police departments in this country have less than 50 officers in them. So if you go down and look to where the vast majority of police departments are those that serve populations between 99,000 people and 25,000 people, those police departments are still have gaps in terms of how many officers of color they have. So in those departments in this country right now is kind of where we still have to do a lot more work in terms of how we recruit officers of color into the profession. When I did my dissertation, one of the things that we want to talk to you about today is what are you doing to recruit officers? What are the tools you're using? What are the messages that you're using to convey? What I found in my dissertation was that the vast majority of officers of color grew up in households that were either poor or working class. And after they became police officers, you can drastically see how they indicated their current status was. The vast majority considered themselves working class, middle class, and then slowly, even a few have transitioned into upper class. So these jobs, in terms of law enforcement, they do offer people, in many respects, a way out of poverty. And when you're advertising your jobs and when you're putting that message together, it's something you may want to consider is advertising your benefit package, and these are good paying jobs to get people out of poverty. And when you think about it, in this country currently right now, we always talk about the wage income gap, right? But in our profession, we don't hire, at least I hope we don't, by and large. If you hire a woman or a person of color or a white officer, everybody's getting paid the same, right? I mean, there may be some stuff that differentiates, as you go throughout your career regarding performance evaluations and promotions and whatnot. But by and large, in law enforcement, we don't have these income gaps that exist in the general population. So again, I just want to emphasize in your recruiting plans, make sure that your recruiters are talking about the benefit packages that your jobs have to offer, because these jobs do, by and large, take people out of poverty. So, in terms of recruiting, what research has said is that minority officers believe their role as police officers is to protect good people. White officers believe their role is to arrest bad people. Neither one of these roles is better than the other, right? Because if you're protecting good people, sometimes you have to do what? Arrest bad people, right? So neither one of these roles are different, but they do affect how you message and how you recruit officers of color when you're looking at this definition. So if you look at this video here, tell me what population you think this video is geared towards recruiting. So, what video would that what video is that geared towards? What audience is that geared towards, right? People who want to go into the profession to arrest bad people. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I was on SWAT for the vast majority of my career. I look at that, but again, when you're talking about why people get into the profession versus arrest good people as opposed to protect good people, arrest bad people, protecting good people, there's a difference in how you recruit. If you look at this video, you can see what audience is this one targeted towards.
I'm Daniel Hahn with the Roseville Police Department. The city of Roseville is a great place to live and raise a family. We also have tremendous affordable housing, especially in relation to other areas of California.
We have great extracurricular activities and outstanding schools. As a matter of fact, some of the best schools in the state. Roseville has over 70 parks within our city, state-of-the-art libraries, and tremendous recreational programs such as soccer camps, baseball program, and athletic facilities.
The Roseville Police Department values a high quality of life.
We're conveniently located halfway between South Lake Tahoe and San Francisco. There are world-class recreational facilities in our area such as...
So, you see the difference in the videos? All right. So when you think about this, this video here, again, you're hitting the community service aspect, you're hitting the economic aspect, you're hitting the community aspect in terms of how your schools are, your neighborhood schools and all the service opportunities. You're going to get two different candidates by these videos. So when you go back to your departments, look at your recruiting videos and see which audience your videos are geared towards. And it really does make a difference. In law enforcement, right now, as you know, most people, how many people in here got over 30 years experience? How many people got over 20 years experience? All right, so you look at all these hands in this room, when we're hiring people for 20, 30 years, right? So the organization you hire today is gonna be the organization you have tomorrow. So that's why recruiting is really, really important, because people get these jobs, and I know there's some research that says millennials don't stay in jobs, but millennials will stay in law enforcement. It's just a matter of which agency they're gonna go to. So the workforce you hire today will be the workforce that you have tomorrow. And with that, I'll turn it over to Doc B for some character-based selection model.
All right, thanks, Dr. Hodges. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Just give you a little bit of background. The things that we're seeing today in terms of bias-based policing, you know, the allegations that we see sweeping, not just here, but it's a global issue. I'm going to go back to my days when I was at the St. Paul Police Department. One of the things we did really pride ourselves on was strong community connections. And what we noticed in '99, 2000, we really weren't any different than the rest of the country at that time. That there were, yeah, we had a lot of support from the community, but there were some key portions, key neighborhoods that were drifting further and further away from feeling like they had a connection with the police department. And so what ended up happening is we would go out and talk about saying, you know, the chief would go out and he would explain, look, we do things based on behavior. It doesn't matter what people look like, it matters what they do. And if there's evidence that indicates someone committed a crime and there's elements there, we follow the law. That's what you hired us to do. Well, you know how that goes. If you've ever been in one of those public meetings and you try to present your case and you provide all the numbers for that, the community perceived it differently. In fact, when the chief, and it was Chief Finney at the time, bigger than life fellow, grew up in the community, And he came in, and he was absolutely convinced after he had run the data. You know, he's going through the slides. He had evidence. He's a cop. Got evidence that says they're doing exactly what I hired the men and women to do. We do things based on behavior. And the community looked at the same data, and they said, Chief, you got a blind spot. Look at your own data. It shows that you're doing things that has bias. So we're at an impasse. And what ended up happening as a result of that is that we decided to really go back to the drawing board and to do some, what I'd say, intimate focus groups where you bring a small group of people, not necessarily, they're interested in the work of the police department, but they're not necessarily friends of the police department. And put them in a conference room and ask them a simple question. What type of men and women should we be hiring so that we can become an agency that's easier to trust? And let them talk. And of course, you know how that goes. If you've ever been in any of those meetings where you have that scribe and they start filling up those giant Post-it notes that 3M makes, right, that easel, filling up that page, stick it on the wall, and pretty soon, about an hour and a half later, you're now back to kind of answering the same thing. So you really had done a nice round way of gathering and harvesting as much information as they could. We did it again. Then you take all of that information, you start to collate it, and lo and behold, what we ended up seeing is that there was a pattern in their responses. And some of the things that they said is they said, it comes down to the character of the men and women that you hire. And I don't know if you're like me, but one of the challenges when anybody brings up that term, you're like, well, how do you define that? Who defines that? I know it when I see it. And we were saying, well, wait a minute. If we're practicing the principles of community policing, we need to figure out how to do what they asked us to do. Not to say, well, you can't do character. So what we decided is we're not going to come up with our own definition of character. The community gave us a definition, and they used terms. You may not be able to see all of these, and this isn't, the list isn't necessarily important, the specific things, but let me just give you a couple on here that would seem quite logical. Act independently, compassionate, courageous, those seem honest, good judgment, those all make sense. Here's what they didn't answer. They didn't talk about ethnicity numbers. They didn't use the term ethics. They didn't talk about physical fitness. And I'll come back to that in a minute. It was kind of interesting. This is what they came up with. But there's one down here. Let's see if I can get the pointer over here. You see this tenacious? We stayed with their answers because this wouldn't necessarily match up with Webster's dictionary. So when you see tenacious, what they were talking about, their definition for tenacious was, we want police officers who, when they respond to a call, are going to stick with it to the very end and they're never going to give up. And then there was another one here, creativity. We know the police officers will never have enough time, enough resources, and enough support to do everything perfectly, but we need them to act quickly and to do as well as they can in the moment. Now, most of us, I think, would say that means resourceful to me. We want resourceful men and women, but they use the term creative. So what we ended up doing then is I started to think about this. Some things happened in St. Paul during that time. Well, this conversation almost kind of stopped at 9/11. You know how that changed for all of us. We had this responsibility then to get our departments up to a new level of readiness. And then in our community, then they announced that the Republican National Convention was coming. They announced it 2 years ahead of time, which that was not a blessing, that was a curse. I wish they would have given us 6 weeks, because if you give people 2 years, they panic for 2 years instead of just 6 weeks. I say that kiddingly, but I actually really mean it as I reflect back on it. But anyway, so 2 years gets lost working on that. Then the 35W bridge collapsed over the Mississippi River, which was actually in Minneapolis. However, like any large event, St. Paul ended up participating heavily in that response. So, and then a change in chiefs. So this whole thing, there was some discussion. Sheriff Sarir was working on some modules of this. I was tasked with doing some work on it, but it just kind of settled. 2010, November 2010, I was elected Ramsey County Sheriff. I was haunted by this community conversation that we hadn't quite got off the ground. I thought we need to get back to this. Now, if you remember 2010, 2011, this conversation wasn't as heavy about bias-based policing, concerns about the other things that we sometimes see about the lack of trust or legitimacy. And I thought, this is going to come back because this is unresolved. We need to execute what these citizens ask. So let's, and now I was sitting in that office that there's no excuses. I could make the decisions. So then I had to think about, all right, now as a boss, a room full of leaders, how do you go to your training staff or to anybody else and start listing repeatedly the character traits that you're talking about and then the definitions that go with it? Can you imagine what that would take and what I would be doing to staff every time I go through that list? It'd be horrible for them. There he goes again. So I guess the term I used after thinking about it for a while, how can I communicate in general what the community is looking for? It's like letting my eyes, I guess, in my way mentally, get used to the light in the room. And I started to see a pattern with these 15. They nested in 4 main areas. They had to do with trustworthiness, truthfulness, responsibility, and respectfulness. So as a result of those 2 things, and what you see up here inside the department, we ended up using the term honor, but what we understood honor to mean was about being trustworthy. So when I communicate this publicly, my list might look a little differently because they'd see honor and they wouldn't necessarily know what that would mean. We do in our field, but they don't necessarily know what that means. So I would explain to them 2 T's, 2 R's, trustworthy, truthful, responsible, respectful. So what we ended up having to do here is think in terms of how do we do this? What are some of the methods that we use? Because traditionally when we hire and recruit deputies and police officers, we focus on the normal things, the things we think we can measure and that we can do it in an unbiased manner, right? So we look at their education, we look at their areas of competence, we look at their skills, we do the deep backgrounds and so on. We'll talk a little bit further about that. So our task then was to figure out now, how do we go about operationalizing this? And what you're going to hear with the presenters that come after me, they're going to talk a little bit further about how these things fit together, because what we believe is that, one, what we're talking about here is we're just talking about the journey that we're on. We're not coming in here to plant the flag and to say, hey, we've solved all this. We're just kind of pulling back the curtain to say we think we've discovered something that might be helpful in some other communities. Ultimately, that brought me to Oxford University, because the issues that we're talking about are larger than just what we saw in Ramsey County or St. Paul. The pattern of trust and the increase in legitimacy seems to be significant if you're a researcher. That's an important word for them. It's significant. And this issue isn't just a US issue, it's a UK issue. It's an Israel issue. It's in every country. If we could do something to do this pattern, take this journey where you start with a community conversation and pull that thread through your operations, you might have something that could start to melt some of that distrust that's there, and to do that long-term building, as Dr. Hodges was talking about. Remember, you're making hiring decisions that are going to be 25 to 30 years. Is that going to be somebody that somebody sees as a person of character that reflects the values of the community? Or is that going to be somebody that's the organizational rock in your shoe for the next 25 years? So what I'm going to turn it over to now is Sheriff Sarir. We're just going to switch. He's going to grab the lanyard from me and talk about operationally how we start to thread this through the organization.
Intermission break. Sheriff doesn't need a mic.
You know, I was just getting ready to say that. Jack does not need.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
All right. I probably don't need this thing, but I probably, for the sake of the camera, I'll wear it. So respect, responsibility, honor, and truth. It's a platform. We're going to talk about how do you operationalize that platform in an organization, which the sheriff and I started to do back in 2011. So you'll see, you got I'm a science fiction nerd. I'll you know, put it out in Front Street right now. So are my kids. My wife still doesn't understand it. But there we've got Luke and Vader, right? Same training, different outcomes. Right? Same training, different outcomes. There's a couple people in there going, I don't see what's wrong with the Vader outcome, but anyway. So there's a couple of my bosses that actually, I think minus the helmet, reminded me a lot of him. But anyway, over 27 years. But one of the things we have come to understand, and many of you understand intuitively, but we've actually started to quantify this, is that when I bring somebody into my organization, if they're broken when I get them, they can still pass the psych. But if they're not a person of character when they come into my organization, I got a problem, right? The sheriff just talked about that organizational rock in your shoe. And you know who they are, right? You've got the 3 to 5 to 10 names in your, depending on the size of your organization, right? It's all scalable. But you know that 1 to 2% of your organization, that is the organizational rock in your shoe. And those are those folks who had problems before they ever came to you, but they ended up in your organization. Now, there's a lot of things we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about, but we've actually engaged our psychologists to help us with this process and been working with them for years on that part of it as well. But we're not going to have a chance to get to that today. But we believe that we have to bring people of character into the organization. We can train most people for the skills we want them to have, whether it's a civilian job in an office, working in corrections, or working as a sworn deputy in our organization. We believe we can get most people trained to that standard. Now, there are some people, world's greatest neighbor shouldn't be a cop, right? So we have some people we bring in our organization and they need to call the police, they shouldn't be the police, okay? True, right? Great people. Maybe even there's another place in the organization for them that's not in the role. They're just not fit for some of those parts of the job that you need them to do. Doesn't mean they're bad human beings. I've got some wonderful people that over the years, way back to St. Paul PD, that just couldn't do the skills necessary to be successful and to be safe. So I'll stop it with there on that. But the part of it is that bringing people into your organization who are broken on the front end are going to cause you nothing but problems. So not only are we going to try to seek people out of good character, the next thing, and I know that I can train almost all of them to do the job that I need them to do, the other thing, the only thing I can do about their character after I have them in my organization is to reinforce it. I can also take somebody of good character and I can erode it, right? Like a pumice stone getting hit by water or by the force of nature. I can erode their character. So my job as a leader, the job of my command staff, the job of my first line supervisors, the jobs of their peers is to reinforce their character. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do you, oops, oh geez. Can you fix that? I'm sorry. It's inevitable that I would do this. All right. So we're going to talk about that. And so why is character important? A long, long time ago, the sheriff and I had a chance to talk to Jim Collins, guy that wrote the book Good to Great. And he said, look, your work in law enforcement needs to focus on leadership and being people of good character. He had his own terminology for that. And we asked him why. And he said, well, because you don't get to choose what you're going to do. It chooses you. He says, all you can do is lead people through whatever quagmire you get sent into on any given day or night. You don't get to choose. The work you do chooses you. So it's so important to make sure that you reinforce good character and good leadership to bring people through those negative moments. And do we have negative moments in law enforcement? That's why we're here, right? Nobody calls you on Thanksgiving and says, hey, I just wanted to call, and we want like an officer to stop by because, you know, the kids are home, everybody's doing great. Yeah, my mother-in-law is here, she's wonderful, right? Nobody's calling you, right? You get called when the kids call because dad's drunk and mom's chasing him around the turkey with a carving knife. That's when you get called. Negative moments. And those can be so corrosive on us. So having people of good character is so incredibly important. And we do so many different things. And if you work in a sheriff's operation, you know, I worked in a police department for a long time. I thought I got it. And I got to the sheriff's office and I'm like, holy cow, right? There's so many things going on. Everything from transports to corrections to court security to civil process. Oh, and then police patrol and investigations on top of it. But no matter where I send that person out into that organization, they need to know what the organizational priorities are. Respect, responsibility, honor, truth. The first day they come into our academy and our organization, something that didn't exist before we started, but we said, we're going to invest in an academy for our staff. When they come in the organization, I tell them something right off the bat. I just have a grease board, and I write on there, respect, responsibility, honor, and truth. And I said, I've written 2 policy manuals in my lifetime. Okay? And I know there's a special place in purgatory with the corporate attorneys for having done so. I know that. I've come to grips with that, and I hope that God will have favor on me in the end. But having written those, I can tell you this. Respect, responsibility, honor, and truth. If you keep those in your mind every time you take your next step in uniform or out of uniform, as you're walking through this career, you will keep on the right path. And 95% of that manual will write itself. And now you're just looking for procedures on where I'm supposed to get gasoline and what form I have to fill out. You're not going to have to worry. All those shiny objects on the sides that tend to distract us in a career when we're not being reminded about where we need to be going will disappear. Doesn't mean it's always going to be easy. Sometimes it's really tough. But if you keep on that path and you ask yourself those 4 questions every time you do your next thing, you'll know what to do. Here's the hard part. It starts with you. It starts with me. Right? I get up every morning, and as I'm shaving both chins, right? I go, I really like what I'm seeing in the mirror. This is a great police administrator, right? The longer I look in the mirror and the more I think about everything I missed as opportunities the day before and what I have to do to be a boss of character today, at the end of that, I'm kind of depressed after shaving. And I'm like, man, it's hard. It's the hardest thing in the world. It starts with you. It starts with me. As much as we say, well, the cops have got to behave, we have to behave too. We have to reflect to everybody that which we ask them to be. So it's what you do. And I'll just tell you right up front, and I tell this to my administrators, if you're a moral mutt, you are not going to be in my administration. If your own family can't trust you, why should I? Doesn't mean we have perfect people. But if you're a moral mutt, guess what? Everybody knows you're a moral mutt. And when you come to work and you tell them to do things and you act like you're standing on the high ground, but actually you're down here in the mud, nobody's going to follow you anywhere. All they're going to do is do what they can to protect themselves from you for the next 8 to 10 to 12 hours or the next 8 to 10 to 12 years. Okay? It's what you do, right? How do you look when you come to work? Do you look like a bag of rags, or do you, make sure that you use Tide on that uniform before you took it out of the wash? How do you comport yourself with the people that you interact with? Right? How do you comport yourself outside of work? Do you use the badge for privilege? Do you abuse the office? If you're doing any of those things, don't even start with this. Just stop now. You're miles ahead. Because all you're going to do is make it worse if you come home and start talking about whatever values you want to have as an organization. It's what you say. What do you say in the workplace? That's really, really important. How do you talk to people? How do you talk about people? Is your message each day uplifting, or is it tearing people down? Incredibly important. Am I perfect? No. Man, I'm trying, but it's really, really hard, right? But each and every day, you've got to have those lifelines in your life that are going to help you continue to be a better person of character. Because it's not just about you, right? Every person in your agency that was sent to you as one of God's children, and they have parents and they have families, and they want the best for them in your agency. And isn't it our moral calling to do the best we can as their boss for them? The way I need to start that is by working on me and providing them a path. What's your reward? What do you reward in your agency? I'm not here to tell you what that is. I don't know. But you need to look really seriously at what you reward. And if you're not rewarding good character, if you're not celebrating that, I do a weekly message. I've done it for years since I was an undersheriff. And I will talk about, hey, Dave did a great job this last weekend. He was on this call, and this is what he did, and that showed great responsibility for his role as a patrol deputy. That's probably embarrassing for Dave. I don't care. Oh, I don't want anybody talking about me. Well, you did a great thing. And what starts to happen, what I've noticed over time, and it's not just amongst the command staff, but it's about the peers, the peer group, is this new sense of accountability, where I literally had it again happen this last week. We had somebody that screwed up, and we had deputies and I had administrators saying, we need to do something about this. How can we be an organization of character if we allow that? Boom. Amazing. It's contagious. What do you reward? How do you demonstrate character and integrity when you communicate with your employees, as I just talked about, is incredibly important. And I'm talking about communication, everything from how, as I said, how you comport yourself, to maybe the notes you write, the speeches you give, all those types of things. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what Pat Lencioni, he wrote Death by Meeting and 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, a whole bunch of other books. 5 Dysfunctions of a Team is probably a seminal work. And he talks about this. He said, look, people will imitate you if you're a leader. Congratulations. Right? And if you think they're not, you're crazy, because they're imitating you as a leader. So now you get to pick the imitation. That's the burden. You get to pick the imitation. Whatever that is, you get to pick it. So if the imitation is about how much you had to drink last night and how cute the girls were, or it's you talking again and again and again about character and how it's important, you get to pick whatever imitation you want to have. Okay? That's on you. It's on me. Right? With me, it's always people going, ho, ho, ho. And then, whatever it is after that. They're always trying to imitate my voice and they can't do it. But anyway. But whatever the words are when that imitation of their fake baritone, right, is important. And that's on me, whatever that imitation is. I get to pick it. You get to pick it. So it's incredibly important for us to be cognizant of our role in reinforcing character in our organizations. And we continually evaluate character. It starts in the first interview. We don't do civil service tests. And we'll talk, I think Chief Anderson will talk about that here in a minute. But we don't do civil service tests. Everybody, no matter how much it kills us, we will, as far as personnel and time, right? We just did, for correctional officers, we did 363 panel interviews in 2 weeks. Okay? We had 464 applicants. We were willing to do all those interviews. 363 showed up. At the end of 2 weeks, the people, they looked like they just walked out of a trench in World War I with a 1,000-yard stare, right? But it was important because the first question we asked them, we set the table right up front. Tell us about a time when you helped someone less fortunate than yourself. You get to define what that is. I don't know how fortunate or unfortunate you've been before you sat down here today. But you got to tell me about where's your heart of service. Where's your thought about character? And we do have people that walk in there and they go, I don't know, never really done anything. Thanks for playing Ramsey County Sheriff, there's the door. Okay? Most of the time you get kind of a stilted, broken answer because most people are pretty humble about it, and they've never really maybe had to explain this before, but you get an answer and you're like, okay, I can work with that. And sometimes I get these answers that are amazing, and literally I feel bad about myself because they're such wonderful people. I'm like, wow. A couple of those are now supervisors. Some of those initial interviews we gave 6 years ago, they're now wearing stripes. Okay? So we set the table immediately. Then we go to the backgrounding process. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today. But we contextualize our backgrounding process to look for character. It's not to be mistakeless in life. What did you learn along the way? How have you changed? What have you done to be different? And I could talk for an hour on that alone, but I will not. But it's really engaging your background investigations process. The field training program, our probationary period, we use all of those. And if you can't show us to be a person of character, if you show that you can't tell the truth, if you show that you're not a person of honor, if you show that you're a person who can't take responsibility, if you ever had this happen in a probationary year, right? Every mistake somebody made is somebody else's fault, right? It was their fault. It was his fault. They didn't train me well enough. It was nothing that happened to him in an entire year was ever their fault. Thanks for playing Ramsey County Sheriff. You're out of here. I am not prideful of the fact that I have moved people on to other places in life after their career at the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office, but I'm glad to have done it because it's better for the organization. Our organizational health improves when you get people of poor character that you didn't catch on the front end. When you start to see that fall apart, if you get them out of there, it's better for your organization because those folks, short-term, intermediate-term, long-term, are toxic to your organization. Toxic. Okay, we're going to play a little thing here.
Hold up on that car wash, gentlemen. Come here, son. Whoops. You look tired, boy. Rest yourself. You punks look tuckered out, too. That's an attention getter.
All right. Sometimes we've got Buford here, right? And you also got Michael Chikellis from the Shield. And we have these. Some people come to our organizations, they have this romanticized, twisted version of what a cop should be. Right? And as a matter of fact, and they try to act that out in their career. So I'll tell you a quick story. So I was a junior administrator over at the St. Paul Police Department. I'm getting gas at the pumps one day, right? I'm standing out there in my uniform, and here comes one of the jeans and T-shirt guys, right? Who are they fooling? Yeah, I'm going to buy dope from you, right? He's coming in his jeans and T-shirts with his gun sticking out from underneath his blue T-shirt, and and he's coming up to me, and I've known this guy for years, and he's on the edge all the time. He's bought into this persona of law enforcement. And he says, Jack, you goody two-shoes administrator types, you know you need guys like me. And I looked right at him and I said, no, I don't. I really don't need you. I don't want you in my organization. I don't want anything to do with you. You're an anathema. The public doesn't trust you, and by extension, then they don't trust me. I said, I wish you'd just go away. Now, later on in my career, I've had an opportunity to make people like this go away. Either straighten up and fly right under this model, or thanks for playing Ramsey County Sheriff's Office. Have a nice career somewhere else. But I don't want you on the front end, and if you're going to stay in my organization, I don't need you. Is that easy? Is it fun? No. Is it the right thing to do? Yes. And that's where, again, it takes the gut check. Am I willing to do what it's going to take to have an organization of character? And it's tough to do some days. So, back to kind of what we talked about, we believe that character cannot be taught. That's something that we can reinforce, we can undergird, but we cannot teach it. If you're broken when you come into my organization, there's not anything I can do to fix that. I can train you for the skills I need almost every time, but I can't fix your character if it's broken before you get to me. So one of the things that Sheriff Bostrom did when he was sheriff, he would come into an academy and he would tell people, look, we have hired you because we have probable cause that you are people of character. Over the next year and for the rest of your career, we will retain you as employees if not only do you meet the minimum bar, but you can truly show that you can be convicted of being a person of character. And with that, I will turn it over to Chief Anderson from St. Cloud, Minnesota. Chief Anderson and I go way back. We were both young patrol officers in different jurisdictions, and so I'm really thrilled to be on the stage with him here today. Thank you.
So I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you all for letting us share some of your time with you. You noticed I'm the only one without the 3 letters behind my name because I am not a glutton for punishment, nor is there a plan to pursue one of those doctor things. I'll just tag along with these guys. So I'm clearly a true believer in this for a variety of reasons, chief among them being that I am both a product and a practitioner of this hiring model right here. And I'm going to tell you and show you what it looks like in real life, and then I'm going to invite you and implore you to do some things so that we can help restore the luster to this great profession. I'm that corny dude, right? When asked how come you want to be a police officer, is to make the world safe for kids, right? So they can reach their full potential, to be of service to other human beings. And it's going to require us to make that happen, but we can do it. We can get that done. So when I was appointed chief in St. Cloud, and you have to remember, in the state of Minnesota is still, even with changing demographics, 95% white, okay? Of the approximately 10,500 police officers in the state of Minnesota, less than 200 are of color. Minneapolis and St. Paul account for about half of those. So the other 75 or 80 of us are spread throughout the state. And I tell you that simply to respond to people that think the panacea for us fixing what is ailing us right now is we got to hire more people of color. Well, what do you do when your pool is small? And there aren't any, right? And I'll explain that to you too. So I get appointed to chief of St. Cloud, and my phone starts ringing from people I've never met before, and they're calling me and they're going, "Are you crazy? Do you know what you're getting yourself into? You're going to White Cloud?" They had earned that nickname. They truly had. Second largest university in the state, and in the late 80s, there was a race riot in the streets. In the late 80s. But I had done my homework, and I had come from this environment, so I wasn't worried. So my first day on the job as a police officer in Dakota County, I showed up for work, and this is the mid-90s. And my first day, I show up in my car. It's 12 years old. It was a Cadillac. This is a true story, right? No stereotypes. It's okay to chuckle, but it was a Cadillac. It was 12 years old, though. And so the guy who was going to be my first supervisor walked up to me in the parking lot with some condescension and a whole bunch of indignation. And he looked at me and he goes, "How did you get a car like that?" And I looked at him, because I like to amuse myself. I said, "I married a rich white woman. How'd you get your stuff?" Don't play with me. I'm not a child. You got a legitimate question, I'll answer it. But don't say stupid stuff to me. Because I knew he had his hood and sheet in his desk drawer. And he got the thermometer face, right? Because he turned about 10 sheets of red But he understood that, guess what, man? Your time is almost done. And I tell you that story because there are still a few of those left, and we need to help them. We need to persuade them to move on into retirement because they're not useful anymore. Not in this profession, not in this day and age. They never were, but certainly now we need to expose them. So when this reporter called me, you know, and asked me about White Cloud, I'm like, listen, I'm not worried about White Cloud or St. Cloud, again, because I had done my homework, and I am a product of this program here, so I don't know why they gave me this. Here's what happens, and here's what you can expect. Now, before you concentrate on that slide too much, let me tell you a couple things, all right? In fact, I won't even tempt you right now. I have 3 simple questions for a potential St. Cloud police officer. And I bring them in, and I sit them down. I ask them 3 questions. Why do you want to be a police officer? And if they say something stupid to me like, well, you know, it's a really good job, strike 1. What have you done in furtherance of your goal to be a police officer? Question number 2. Well, I watch Cops and I read Tactical Hero. Strike 2. You're running out of time. Last question. Have you ever volunteered anywhere? Right? Back to the sheriff's point. Same principle. If the answer is no, their stuff goes in the garbage. Can't use you. You will not be as effective as we need you to be now if you have never done anything for someone who can do absolutely nothing for you without expecting anything in return. Seems rudimentary, doesn't it? But we've complicated things in a variety of ways, and so we're trying to uncomplicate them. Very simple. You never volunteered for anybody? And you want me to put a badge and a gun on you and give you the authority to use lethal force at your discretion based on the circumstances? Sorry, can't use you. Some of you probably think it's impossible to do away with old written civil service tests. I'm living proof that it is possible. It's not easy, but it can be done. That was one of my first orders of business. Why? Because we kept getting the same 10 candidates, top 10, same every time. Why? They became great test takers. The test was archaic and outdated 20 years ago. In some places, they were still using the same civil service test, the written exam that they used when Vietnam veterans came home in the mid-70s. Well, that's dumb, so we don't do that anymore in St. Cloud. And police unions in the state of Minnesota are every bit as ferocious and stubborn as they are everywhere else. And just so you know, I'm not a union hater or a union buster. I was born and raised in Detroit, right? The cradle, the home, the birthplace of the American Labor Union. So I have nothing against unions. But we got rid of that test. Why? So that we can install our part of our new system here, and I call it an education and experience evaluation. You guys, we can do this stuff. I'm telling you, I do it. I'm doing it. When I'm recruiting people, I give them extra points for having been a volunteer somewhere, wherever it is. When I'm recruiting, they get points for having been an intern. They get points if they've ever worked in a locked facility, whether it's to take care of vulnerable adults, right, or misguided children. I give them extra points for that because those are the kinds of character traits and those are the kinds of people that are going to be de-escalators, right? They're going to be problem solvers. They're going to be creative in their methodology when they do that. I use my community service officer program as a feeder program for them. They get extra points for that. And I created 2 lists. I have an external and an internal list. And the internals don't have to compete with the externals. Check with your HR. I'm telling you, it's all legal. You can do this. And you can bring them right in and use it like a feeder system. And by the time you're ready to put them on the street, you've already seen what they can do for a year or two. When they come through our academy, they spend 10 weeks in-house before they go on the street. And 25 or 30% of that is them learning our community engagement strategies and getting to know the leaders in our community. That's an absolute must. They don't get the street, they don't see the street or a patrol car until they finish that. So what do we get as a result of that? And keep in mind, I came from the outside, right? So I had very little institutional knowledge about this particular agency. So I wanted to find out who my problem children were going to be, right? Don't tell anybody. I know this is on camera, but don't tell anybody. It's a little trick. So the rules had gotten a little bit lax. My predecessor, by his own admission, admitted he had stayed a little bit too long, and he had hurt the organization in the process. Okay, fine. I wanted to know where I was going to get resistance. So my first directive as chief of police was that anybody working for the St. Cloud Police Department, whenever they are interacting with a member of the public, needed to have their cover on, need to have their hat on. Seems like a simple directive, right? It gave them 90 days to comply. Well, the first call I got was from the lady at the local uniform store, because she said, "What the hell are you doing? There's a stampede in here for hats, for one item." I'm like, just take care of them. They got 90 days. Anybody here, I'm an interactive kind of guy. Anybody here want to guess why I did that? See who would wait until they had to. Because at the end of the day, they were all going to comply, right? Yeah, absolutely. But I wanted to wait. I wanted to see who would wait until day 90. And there were a few of them, and guess what? Biggest pains in my ass that first year. But guess what happened after we employed this? You get a whole lot of self-policing, right? And some of those dinosaurs, like Sergeant Assface that I talked about, right, with my car, him, and some of the others who wait and only do it when they have to, and they do that, and you got to drag them kicking and screaming. Well, guess what? They start to find themselves on an island because they don't have the same value system that we have. And you see the wheel of integrity there? Now, if you notice, it looks remarkably similar to the 4 points that both sheriffs here highlighted, and Dr. Hodges as well. I had nothing to do with their research directly, but the night before I addressed the entire staff, I'm thinking I need to figure out a way to convey to them what I expect and what they can expect from me. And so I wrote this down because I'm an idea man, you guys, and sometimes they work. And so I wrote this down. This is our wheel of integrity. And the idea is simply this. Just think of a wheel like that with 5 spokes on it. Each spoke represents one of those values. If, whenever you are interacting with another human being, I don't give a damn who it is. If any of those are missing, start over. Check yourself. Again, this sounds rudimentary, but sometimes this is the stuff that's missing way before things go sideways and wind up on the news. Those things are missing. Seems rudimentary, because sometimes it is. Everything I needed to know to be successful in this world, professionally or whatever else, my mother and father taught me before I was 5. How do you treat other human beings? Very simple. How do you treat other people? And so when they show up for work for that first day of the academy, they get one of these, because I put it on the challenge coin. And they're required to carry it because this is our moral compass. And again, we're not perfect. So when you're having a bad day and you forgot that I installed the emotional dumpster on the perimeter of the building, it's invisible, but it can hold as much as you can put in it. And so if you forget to make your deposit before you walk in the building that day, you've got a reminder. And it works. And I encourage them to give those to any citizen that they see demonstrating those characteristics and helping us build community. And as a result of that, guess what? Some of those old dinosaurs decided, yeah, I should probably retire. Yep, you should have a long time ago. You were lucky to get hired. Because they figure out that they're not going to make it if they have to toe this line every single day. And what a shame for them, but sorry, can't use you. So here's what'll happen. Living proof right here, you guys. My first 2 years there, I had at least 4 grievances a week from one of my 7 bargaining units. I haven't had one for almost 3 years. I've turned over the department almost 25%. And I've added 10 new FTE. And so those 10 account for the 25% turnover. And in the next 3 years, it's probably going to be another 40% of that department. But I'm confident whether I'm there or not because this is in place. IA complaints, man, thing of the past for us. When something happens somewhere else, when that horrible, moronic, let me stop, but the Dallas shootings, when those officers were killed, our citizens came down to give us a hug. That's the kind of, that's what we should all be striving for. Right? When we had a mall attack and 12 people were stabbed, my city didn't burn down because the attacker was Muslim. They came and they gave us a hug. And the reason for that is because they appreciate and respect how they are treated on a daily basis. So it works, you guys. And I'm not kidding. And it may be more difficult for some of you than others to get there, but don't stop trying because this is our responsibility. It is. Most of the problems that we see, at least for me, they're leadership issues, man, because there have been signs. There have been many red flags that have been ignored. So we have to have the courage, you guys. We have to stand our ground. And we have to have the courage to make sure that this is the standard, that this is the norm, that character-based hiring will replace archaic, draconian, written civil service tests, because it really does work.
Oh, you can cut it off. All right, I'm going to go ahead and blow through a couple things in terms of the actual how we do this. Here's our current hiring process at the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office where we implemented this model. Application. Everybody who meets the minimum qualifications of the application is sent on to the physical agility testing. At this point, our list is not finalized, so after the physical agility testing. Once you pass physical agility, every single person gets an interview. We interview everyone. After the interview, we do, if you pass the interview, then you move on to backgrounds. Once backgrounds are completed, we got a checklist spreadsheet that we give to the sheriff in chief, and it has each applicant on it, and it has if they volunteered, what their college education is, what their previous law enforcement experience is, have they worked for a law enforcement agency before, so there's this huge, massive spreadsheet. After they do their sheriff chief interview, we do a psychological and a medical exam, and then we go to the final job offer. In terms of HR, it's called a banded list. Your HR people should know what that is, meaning that every single person that meets the minimum qualifications, you interview. Now, like the sheriff said, I mean, you have to interview 360 people and it takes 2 weeks, but that way we're getting to see the applicants and it's not a screened list. And the sheriff the chief too and Blair can hire anybody off that list. So what we've seen is we've seen a significant increase in our diversity. Because of that, again, we're hiring for character. We're not hiring for people who can keep passing these draconian civil service tests. So I'll just leave that up here for a second. Again, this is our current hiring process. Our physical agility is the Cooper standards based on gender and age. And the reason for that is that in terms of workman's comp, if people come into the job physically fit, they have a significant less likelihood that they're going to have a workman's comp injury. And the most accurate predictor of that is the sit and reach test. So when you do your Cooper standards test, the sit and reach test is the most accurate predictor if someone's going to have a workplace injury at the job. So it's been phenomenal. I mean, for us, we believe that you need to come into the academy in shape, not the academy is going to get you in shape. And we haven't seen the injuries in our academies for the last 6 years, nor the injuries in employees in terms of job performance. And they're still out there running around chasing people and doing their jobs. Retention. Right now, there are currently over 20,500 law enforcement agencies in the country, around 725 sworn officers in America. Less than 40% of local agencies have more than 10 officers. So in this country, we have a lot of small police departments. 54% of officers work in jurisdictions that serve more than 100,000 residents. 1 in 8 officers are female, 1 in 10 frontline supervisors are female. So you can obviously see we have some work to do, and these are all BGS statistics in terms of gender in the workplace. 27% of officers are color, we discussed that earlier. 15% of police departments require at least some college. In Minnesota, we have a requirement that you have at least a 2-year associate's degree in law enforcement before you become a police officer. All right, so law enforcement is one of the most stressful occupations in the world, obviously, and social factors such as race exacerbate occupational stress on minorities in the law enforcement profession. So when I did my dissertation, this is in terms of retention, some stuff you want to think about as leaders in your organization if you're seeing people of color leave your organization. What I found is that the vast majority I had 44% African-American officers, 36% of Latino officers, and 21% of Latino officers, 36% of Asian officers said that they felt in the workplace that they were held to a higher standard than their white counterparts, and only less than a percentage of white officers agreed with that. So when you look at your workforce, these things all contribute to retention. And if you look at, they're going to look for another job within a year. 22% African-American officers said that, 21% of Latino officers, and 12% of white officers. So in terms of retention and retaining officers of color, you want to keep some of this stuff in mind when you're going through with your workforces. What I found in my dissertation, too, was the racial composition of command staff theory, and everybody in here is a leader. When you start to promote people to command staff, these are some some ideas to keep in mind. What I found was that if you were in a group that was not represented in the command staff structure, either racially or gender-wise, your police officer stress went up. And this is transparent even with white officers who were in police departments with African-American chiefs and a whole African-American command staff structure. Their police officer stress was up because they weren't represented in the command staff structure. So as your representation goes up, your police stress goes down. If you look at this was Miami-Dade during the time of the Ferguson incident. You look at this command staff structure, you can at least think there's a legitimate chance that if you raise through the ranks that you could have an opportunity to get promoted. Chief Moss is actually the police chief in Ferguson now. But if you look at the Ferguson Police Department during the time of this incident, where you had such a large percentage of people of color in the city, and that's your command staff, obviously what you're going to feel like when it's time to get promoted in that department. So some stuff to think about. Retention, unfairness costs employers $64 billion a year. That's a lot of money. People of color are 3 times more likely to cite workplace unfairness as the only reason for leaving their employers. That's 2 times more than white males and white females. I'm just going to blow through some of this stuff so we can get some questions. But the key to take away from this is 85% of employers or 85% of people who leave your job because of perceived unfairness are going to tell other people not to come to your job or come to your place of employment. So if you're losing officers of color, you're losing police officers in general, you want to make sure they're not leaving because you're treating them unfairly. Because what's this going to do to your recruitment plan if 85% of the people who leave tell other people not to come there? And especially with some of the affinity groups, you have these officer of color associations who have a lot of student mentors and whatnot, and they spread the word that your department is not a good place to work. That's really going to affect you. And this was a Level Playing Field Institute study in 2007. Fair salary was the most important concern they found in this for white men and women. Benefits were for gay and lesbian couples, and managers who recognized their abilities was a chief concern for employees of color. So if you have a workforce where you have integrated workforce and you're getting employees of color, make sure you keep this in mind in terms of employee recognition. So with that, we'll just conclude here and we'll take some questions. Just remember recruitment. For your recruitment plan, your demographics and what you're trying to attract, advertise your economics, you know, what is the financial benefits of your job, and for us, that character-based model of hiring people who possess honor, truth, respect, and responsibility. It starts with you, and you reinforce it throughout your entire hiring process. And just remember, in terms of retention, I knew I blew through it, but bias in the workplace costs money. And if people leave your job or your law enforcement agency, they're going to go out and they're going to tell other people not to come to your agency. So, and we've seen this work. I mean, our organization in Minnesota, like the chief said, you know, our state doesn't have that many people of color, but our organization has been highly successful at attracting and retaining officers of color based on the character-based hiring model and what we've been able to accomplish. So with that, we'll take some questions, and here's our contact information.
Is it possible for you to get the slideshow up on the app so we can download it?
Yeah, I'll get that on there. If you have the app, we do have a brochure that's on the app that you can download that has these character traits on there also too.
Can I wrap up?
Yeah.
Thinking about taking away a merit test. Basically, my agency is in a transition. I work at Wayne County Police in Southeast Georgia. We're in transition, much like the chief talked about whenever he came in. And we have been looking at two different things, two different issues separately when it comes to hiring. One is absolute lack of diversity in the police department, which is caused by the applicant, a lack of recruitment, a lack of successful recruitment in that pursuit. So we've been working on that issue. And separately is the people we do hire and send to the police academy. We have a relatively high failure rate academically. And so, not only we're working on recruiting issues to try to recruit more diversity, but we are actually doing the opposite. We have been talking about making steps to implement a test that has never existed, to try to screen for, to ensure that we're not going to have people fail out academically and try to fix that problem. Have you noticed any issues with taking away this is for everybody in the panel. Are there any issues, or do you have any steps in place to try to screen not only to weigh the balance of character-based traits, but also have some steps to try to screen for academic competence?
Well, and for us in Minnesota, our process is probably a little bit different in this, is that everybody has to have at least a 2-year college degree, so everybody's had to at least meet that academic standard. And then on top of that, our psychological exam also measures for somebody's ability to be able to function in the profession academically. So we have those two layers in place, and that's kind of how we deal with that.
And to your point on the recruitment piece, when Sheriff Boster and I came to the sheriff's office almost 7 years ago, there was no recruitment plan. There was nothing. And many of you probably have already realized that the days of turning on the now hiring light are over. People aren't going to come flocking to your neon sign. And so when it comes to the applicant pool, we dove in, right, head first. And we have dedicated a lot of resources to doing what I call guerrilla recruiting. where we will show up in people's backyards, we'll rappel out of ceiling tiles in schools, we'll do whatever we have to do to find people of good character, but also people with the requisite backgrounds educationally to do this. But it is but that also has complemented our diversity and everything else, for both race and gender in our organization. It takes time and getting that flywheel moving. And now I mean, even in the last year, watching how fast it's spinning now compared to what it was for the first 5 years is remarkable.
Let me add this too, Sheriff. Keep in mind, the Sheriff's last point is probably the most salient. It's going to be a long process, so don't be afraid to start recruiting in junior high school. Don't be afraid to use some of your community engagement strategies to sow those seeds now. You may not see them germinate, but if you get them in that pipeline now, 3, 4, 5 years from now, you'll enhance the pool considerably. And here's one other thing to keep in mind too. If you have a smaller minority candidate pool, here's what you shouldn't do. Don't bring in one, because they're not going to last long there. I was one of the first people of color that retired Sheriff Gutmanson hired, and he brought us in pairs. And if that's hard for you to understand, I guess, just imagine what it would be like for you if you went somewhere where you were the only one, whether you're female, male, your ethnicity, whatever it was. You're adding unnecessary stress. So, bring them in bunches, right? The attrition rate is going to be the same as it is for every other candidate, but when you're the only one, trust me, the days get longer. Yes, Chief.
I'll let Doc B answer the sit and reach piece, but it's the Cooper standards. It's 50% of the Cooper standards, and that's age and gender specific.
Yeah, so one of the things when I came over as sheriff, most departments, and when I came from St. Paul, there was a physical piece, but somebody in HR said you can't have a physical test, so, cops were like, well, we're not the hiring managers, so that must be true. Well, I got to be sheriff, I asked the question again and asked the why, and it turned out it wasn't exactly true, that we could do this. So, and you can see the standard is 50%. If you're familiar with Cooper Institute, that's what they do, is just consistently measure fitness, ability. What does that mean? How does that change over time? So they have all the different layers, whether it's age and gender. So, of course, I asked the question, why do we do the 4 elements that we do? Because they did a 1.5 mile run, sit and reach, was sit-ups and push-ups, right? Like, when was the last time we chased a suspect for 1.5 miles? I said, that just plain, yeah, get a cab. I didn't understand what that was about. So I said, is there an alternative? And they said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, there is one for 300 meters. I said, I would like to know if our deputies could chase somebody all out for 3 blocks. I would like to know an answer to that. Can they do that? And do they have enough upper body strength to hold on to them and core strength to win that wrestling match? But I said, okay, what's the deal with the sit and reach? And that's when Cooper's Institute came back and they said that in all of their research, if you eliminate all of your tests, that's the one they say is the best predictor of future. Now, they could get into a long explanation as to why that is. I think we can kind of figure out what that is, but they said that alone correlates to workplace injuries later in life. So I thought, all right, I didn't get into the deep research, but I took it, and it has turned out, one of the earlier slides that Chief Anderson had on there, I don't know if you noticed it, but you went down, you're talking about people that use less sick time than average. They're getting injured on duty less than average. And part of that is when they come in shape, and it's a character issue to stay in shape. And then the other side is they're getting more compliments than average. And we were just talking about it this morning. I said, how many use of force or I'm sorry, excessive force allegations have been made in the last 6.5 years? And the answer is 0. That's almost not human. I mean, people complain about so many things. So it's not a matter of how many lawsuits have been filed. 0 allegations. And these are people that are out arresting people. So it's not as if they're in a closet somewhere and that's the reason. So there's something embedded in their character, and it goes back to part of that. You don't just use one lens to discern this. You use a variety of lenses, one of which, as you know, for those of you that have kept yourself in shape, that requires discipline and responsibility. Oftentimes you're doing it for other people. You're showing respect. There's a whole, you can name why people of character oftentimes keep themselves in shape. Have time for one more question, and then we'll wrap it up. Or we could wrap it up now if there are no more questions. Isn't that great? Oh, good, we've got one more. Yes, sir.
Chief Anderson, you mentioned that your first directive was to have the officers in your department wear their hats. You said that the main reason you wanted to see if they would do it, or was there any other reasoning on a professional level as to why you believe wearing
Oh, absolutely. That wasn't the only reason, and I apologize if that's the impression that I left. I spent 8 years in the United States Army, so it's part of the uniform, A. 2, the city paid for it, and D, damn it, you look damn good when you wear it. And we're in a college town. If you're in a crowd fighting with somebody, I need to be able to find you, right? And we got a lot of positive feedback. I mean, I'm just big on appearance. I'm big on uniform, and that's part of this as well. So I apologize if I left the impression that that was the only reason. Absolutely not. It had to do with completing that picture, and the positive feedback that has come back has been tremendous. Now, keep in mind, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. B. You know, cops being who we are, they started to ask me really dumbass questions like, so Chief, if I'm going to a medical and I've got to get the defib out, you know, do I have to have my... And this is what they would get from me, this look right here. What do you think? If that was your loved one who was in cardiac arrest, would you want me to look around for my hat? I'm like, guys, use some common sense. So, you know, we've had a little fun with it too, but it's interesting, no matter how simple the directive, right?
Right, absolutely.
Did that answer your question, sir? Okay.
So we appreciate your attention. I mean, it's 90 minutes. You've been tremendous. Most of you hung with us. There's a few that had obviously other important appointments. But as we wrap this up, if there are other things that you would want to visit with us, again, this is part of a journey. We're not coming here to say, hey, we've got this dialed in. That's part of what my responsibility is, try to contribute to the field. I think many of the things that we saw heads nodding while we're talking about this, and a fair amount of chin rubbing, like, boy, that, you know, you guys have given some words to some things that I've been working on. At the conclusion, when we've presented kind of this journey in different places, National Sheriff's Association or the FBI National Academy, normally there'll be some leaders that come up and say, hey, can you give us the playbook? Well, that's the issue. We're operational. Really don't have a playbook. The sheriff has his hiring huddle. The chief has his hiring huddle. Everybody gets in their lane. You work your plan, and you have a hiring product at the end. There isn't, and then secondarily, this is specific to St. Cloud or St. Paul, Minnesota, Ramsey County. I think it would be really arrogant to say this is going to work everywhere. We need to validate this in some other communities. And so what I'm doing right now is working with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office to take this plan from the community engagement and just pull that thread all the way through the agency, just to, not the hiring portion of it, and start measuring to see if there's any of these changes. Are we starting to move the needle in a positive way? Also in Plano, Texas, at the Plano PD, as well as Ferguson, Missouri. So we have a smaller agency, medium-sized police department, and a large sheriff's office. So stay tuned, there will be more coming out on that, but that really is the objective, is to try to come up with something and say, there's some patterns here that we can use, and there is a way to use character to guide our decisions so that we can become more and more precise with that. And as Sheriff Sarir was talking about, he was talking about some of the things that we do, and what we're ending with is a personal note that I had put on the bottom of my email. And some of you might do that too, that, you know, underneath your signature line and underneath all your contact information, some people have some clever retort, you know, a quote from Groucho Marx or whatever it is. They have something there that means something to them. And I put this Latin phrase in there, not because I'm a Latin scholar, but it wasn't there to promote anything else other than to be a check for me. Chief Anderson talks about a coin being that reminder. For me, this was one of my reminders. Perstantia means exceptional excellence. It's a Latin phrase for that. Per means through or by doing, and servo has two parts to it, looking after others and watching over others. So why did I have that on my emails? And that was my way to just say, is everything above that line consistent with that phrase? Does it exhibit exceptional excellence, and does it demonstrate that I'm doing well and looking after and watching over others? And as sheriff, I'd answer it twice. For the citizens that elected me, and second, for the responsibility that I have to look after our employees. Because if I didn't meet that threshold, that email should not go out. A lot of folks thought that that was just my clever way to say protect and serve, which kind of fits, but that's really not what it is. But some people asked, what does that mean? What does that mean? And lo and behold, several deputies started to grab that. Sheriff was talking about imitation. We did a retrospective book celebrating 170 years as a sheriff's office. And when I saw the proofs for the book on the badge, had that phrase on there. I didn't ask for that. That was their book, not mine. And we go into our fitness room, our defensive tactics room. On the walls, the training unit put up there, honor, truth, responsibility, and respect. Right above the door was that phrase. It's internally focused. So we know that we're starting to move the needle inside the organization. And the last story that I would have is we had a horrific event in Falcon Heights, Minnesota, which is in Ramsey County. Philando Castile was killed at a traffic stop. A neighboring agency, the St. Anthony Police Department, was an officer contracting over there. And subsequent to that, there was numerous community meetings. Falcon Heights is a community of about 5,500. And we start to wonder, how do we know if we're making any inroads in our areas of trust and legitimacy with our community? And in one of the very first community meetings, somebody stepped up to the microphone and they said, how come St. Anthony is serving as our police department? Why isn't it the sheriff's office? And when do you start the contract for the Falcon Heights city?
January 1st, 2018.
Something is happening. And so we appreciate the opportunity to share our journey with you. If there are other things that you think could help us advance this or help me advance what I'm working on, and we can continue to raise the tide, not just here in the U.S., but globally, we have an opportunity here. And so we appreciate your attention. Thank you so much for spending this time with us, and our continued best as you guide your departments into the future. So thank you very much.